they wanted to try, they had to do at least 3 tests and trials. So some of them did at home. And, seeing them try to work out the costs from, going on Countdown and everything, going, oh, I can't afford cheese. That kind of thing. It's absolutely fantastic.
So cool.
And yeah, it was so neat. And they're just they're a good bunch of kids. They just really got into it, and it was really neat seeing, them learning about, food costs even, or what is out there, and the seasonal vegetables. If anyone's interested, they can go themselves onto the 5 Plus a Day website.
5 Plus Today, all right. Hey, Chantel, while we have time, I want to sneak in this. Do you want to give the students a bit of a shout-out? What school?
It's Diocesan School for Girls in Auckland. And they just, it was a couple of Year 10 classes, but obviously we've got some more coming through now. So they're absolutely fantastic, and they're gorgeous girls. So
Good on you.
That they're having a lovely holiday.
Yes.
And see them soon.
And hopefully we'll get some of the recipes. A meal for a family of 4 for a total of $8 overall. Chantel Gerard, thank you very much for your time. Wonderful wee discussion about seasonality and making sure that you eat right in the right season, Victoria.
It is, and I think anything that is teaching young people value for money, what they should be eating, how they should cook it, and actually how hard the caregivers have to work to put food on the table is a great thing.
What do you think, Rajoshi?
Absolutely, and I love that conversation. And my one tip, along with going seasonal, is to go frozen. You remember that movie Moneyball about getting these undervalued players if you're working with a small budget? There's one way to Moneyball your supermarket shop. Then frozen fruit and veggies are one of the top items that are kind of undervalued for what they bring in nutrition and value.
True.
So that would be what I'd add.
I love
tips
my
and
frozens.
tricks from Raj.
Tips and tricks from Raj and Victoria. Speaking of tips and tricks, Graham says, does Rajoshi have a speedo like mine? It reads 105 k's per hour, but I know my car is only doing 96.
Oh, right. No, I wish my family is going to, when I get home, and they're just going to laugh at the fact that I spent that entire trip doing 96. I clearly cannot do irony on the radio without facial cues. So I will bear that in mind.
Re-speeding, why not set up cameras to photo people driving at the correct speed and send them prizes? Positive reinforcement. I'll make it cash and watch everyone stick to the limits. And speaking of which, a bit of feedback around your comment, Raj. The statement, taking our country back, shows both a belief in entitlement and a corresponding belief in non-entitlement, both, in my opinion, divisive and a cause for concern. So we really appreciate you. A lot of feedback this afternoon, and a lot of people giving a big high fives to both Rajoshi, Chakraborty and Victoria Stewart. So I really do appreciate your time, both of you.
Our pleasure. I'll speak for both of us, Raj.
Yeah. And a couple of people wanted, what are you working on these days, Raj, in 10 seconds or so? What's the latest project in terms of your writing?
The Bad Smell Hotel and a supernatural novel called The Crossers.
Buy them.
Very cool. All right. Victoria Stewart, Rajoshi Chakraborty, thank you very much for being with me. I'm back tomorrow with Liam here and Verity Johnson. See you then.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei, day one in the new job. Is Judith Collins crushing it or not? Senior MP Michael Woodhouse is the first to be shuffled sideways, stripped of his health portfolio following Leakgate. We speak to Cantabrians shaken by Jerry Brownlee's promotion, and the new national leader joins us live. Kaipara's council forks out millions to chase rates rebels. How much is too much? Regional and even neighbourhood lockdowns are on the cards if there's a new community outbreak of COVID-19. Meanwhile, Victoria's got another 230 cases of coronavirus. Authorities there are pleading with people to follow the lockdown rules. And Qantas heads further into hibernation.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leatawa tēnei. Firefighters have spoken of the trauma following the deaths of 2 young children in a house fire in Christchurch. Emergency services were called to the fire on Vivian Street in Burwood at about 11:15 last night. But by the time they got there, the house was well ablaze. Fire and Emergency Assistant Area Commander Mike Bowden says they managed to rescue an 8-year-old boy who tragically later died. An 8-month-old baby was found in a bedroom where he says the fire appears to have started.
Obviously, the very main focus is, of course, with the family involved themselves. But, you know, these things impact on neighbours who are there. It's very traumatic for them. And the ambulance, the police and fence staff are all, our first responders tend to be young family people with children of a very similar age.
Firefighter Mike Bowden. National leader Judith Collins has stripped Michael Woodhouse of the health portfolio, saying he should have alerted officials as soon as he received confidential COVID-19 patient data. Mr Woodhouse revealed on Friday former party president Michelle Bogue had sent him 4 emails containing private patient details. He didn't tell his boss for 2 weeks and deleted the emails the day an inquiry into the leak was announced. Ms Collins today demoted Mr Woodhouse to the party spokesperson for Pike River Recovery and Regional Economic Development. Shane Reti has been promoted to health spokesperson and to the front bench. A reshuffle of the party's caucus will be announced tomorrow. Michael Woodhouse has expressed his disappointment that Judith Collins has stripped the health portfolio from him. Mr Woodhouse says he did want to be health minister after the 2020 election.
Look, that's what I was aspiring to. But, you know, that's politics. Now I'll aspire to be an economic development minister or regional economic development, finance role. There's any number of other doors that open when this one closes, and that's my entire focus now.
Michael Woodhouse says his replacement in the health portfolio, Dr Shane Reti, will do a great job. National says people aren't using the COVID Tracer app because it isn't user-friendly, and the government is giving mixed messages. The government repeated its calls today for people to register the app and make sure they scan the QR codes when they're entering businesses. They say it is an important tool in contact tracing if there is a resurgence of community transmission. But National leader Judith Collins says the app is too difficult to use.
I tried to use it about 2 weeks ago, and then I thought, oh, come on, I couldn't even make it work. So people are now not using it so much because after all, we're not in lockdown, are we? And I thought the borders were secure, weren't they?
Judith Collins says the government needs to do a better job at selling the importance of the app. 2 new cases of COVID-19 were reported today, bringing the number of active cases to 27. The police are investigating the possible hacking of a research company. Assistant Commissioner Jevon McSkimming says the potentially compromised information includes the contact details of a number of people who have had contact with the police. The information was sent to the unnamed research company as part of a quality of service survey. Mr McSkimming says its cybercrime team is working to find out the scope of the hack and the potential impact of any breaches. The Department of Conservation is warning people who do the Cape Kidnappers Walk in Hawke's Bay will be risking their lives. The walkway, which has been closed since January 2019 when 2 tourists were seriously injured by a landslide, will reopen at the end of the year. A spokesman for DOC, Hayden Barrett, says the GNS report released today has found the danger is much higher than expected.
And as a result, we've made a decision to reduce the level of track standard that we're going to be providing to our visitors, and really inform them about that level of risk and leave it up to them to decide whether they're willing to accept that before using the site.
Hayden Barrett says the GNS report has put the risk of the Cape Kidnappers Beach Walk as higher than rafting or jet boating. It's coming up to 4.5 minutes past 5. 4 homesick Warriors players are to head home, leaving the club's New South Wales base midway through the National Rugby League competition. Ken Maumalo, David Fusitua, Ignatius Parsi and King Vuniyayawa will leave their Terrigal base on Monday, 2 days after the round 11 match against the Sydney Roosters. The club has been told the NRL would get government exemptions for their families to join them from New Zealand Zealand, but that hasn't happened. Warriors Chief Executive Cameron George says there's no hard feelings about the players' departure.
I'm not at all critical of the guys, their decision, because, they are family men. They've got responsibilities both personally and professionally, and they've decided to take this course of action. And we as a club will support that, make sure when they get home they're being supported as well.
Warriors boss Cameron George. Football's A-League has moved its playoffs and championship deciding grand final back a week as part of a schedule rejig amid a spike in COVID-19 infections. The season resumes on Friday after a 4-month hiatus, with the Wellington Phoenix playing Sydney FC. The regular season will now finish on August 19th. The semi-finals will start 3 days later, with the grand final now on August 30th. Clusters of infections across Sydney in recent days have also prompted the A-League to draw up contingencies to move teams to Queensland if necessary. That's the news.
Something old.
The crusher has rolled in.
Something new.
I've been very privileged to be voted as the leader of the New Zealand National Party.
Something blue. There's been so much talk about generational change and a fresh face, and this is certainly not that. But that experience will hold them in good stead.
What a difference a day makes. Morning Report, weekdays from 6, on air and online.
Now the short forecast for a Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland rain with possible downpours turning to showers tomorrow morning. Easterly gales easing tomorrow morning also. Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula periods of rain with possible downpours tomorrow. Easterlies rising to gale tonight before easing tomorrow evening. Waikato to Taranaki, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country, also Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Periods of rain with heavy falls about Western Bay of Plenty. Strong gusty easterlies, gale about eastern Waikato tomorrow. Whanganui to Wellington and Wairarapa, mostly cloudy. A few showers in Wellington and Wairarapa at times. For Marlborough, Canterbury and eastern Otago, mostly cloudy with patchy drizzle, clearing for a time tomorrow afternoon. Nelson, Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, also inland Otago and Southland. Mainly fine with high cloud, but persistent low cloud about some inland valleys and basins. Chatham Islands, a few showers. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Judith Collins has made a show of force on her first day as leader of the opposition, swiftly sacking the party's health spokesperson for his role in last week's meltdown. It's her first major call after being elected late last night in an emergency caucus meeting, prompted by Todd Muller's sudden resignation. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
Day one under Judith Collins and her colleagues are clear. She is an entirely different type of leader from those before her.
Different style altogether. Judith is by nature quite an aggressive person.
She is a formidable politician.
She's feisty, she's a fighter.
You always know where you stand with Judith.
I think she's the right person for the time.
In a word...
fabulous.
Impressive.
Aggressive.
Formidable.
Strong and effective, that's two, but, I'm a lawyer.
Strong, determined, competent.
And today was her first chance to prove it. Elected last night, it was past midnight by the time Judith Collins left Parliament. This morning, right into the relentless round of media interviews.
Good morning, Corin.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And it was on Morning Report where she foreshadowed her first major decision as leader.
Was it tenable for Michael Woodhouse to stay as your health spokesperson?
Let me have a look at the facts first and I'll discuss that, but I think we'll see what happens today.
She didn't take long. By 3 o'clock, the decision was made. Mr Woodhouse gone as health spokesperson. Crush's first demotion.
It's a matter that needs to be dealt with. The public was rightly appalled that people's personal medical records were being sent around, and they are rightly appalled that any of those found their way into the media.
And like that, Mr Woodhouse loses his job in health. In place, he gets 2 other gigs, the party's new spokesperson for regional development and for Pike River. He was the last MP standing, still connected to last week's meltdown, having received the leaked information and failing to notify authorities or his boss. His demotion serves 2 purposes. It helps National draw a line under the episode, and allows Ms Collins to stamp her authority.
We need to move on, don't we? We have an election to win.
So who then, in the middle of a pandemic, will take Michael Woodhouse's place as Shadow Health Minister?
However I can help New Zealanders, that's what I'll do. That's what I'd like to do.
Shane Reti, you may remember his name from National's frontbench fiasco. The Māori MP was placed at number 17 by Todd Muller, now propelled to the front bench.
We have in Dr Shane Reti someone who is not only a medical doctor but a specialist and someone who has even worked at Harvard.
Tomorrow, Ms Collins will announce the rest of her team, their new roles and rankings. She says it will be a minor reshuffle. Don't expect an overhaul this close to the election.
I must say it's more difficult being on the divvying up end than it is being on the receiving end, isn't it?
Ms Collins is the fourth National leader to face off against Jacinda Ardern, her style at utter odds with the Prime Minister, giving voters a clear choice at the election. But while Ms Collins is putting on a show of force, Ms Ardern is trying on indifference.
I don't really sit down and analyse them all. My focus, my time, my energy is going into our COVID response, and that's as it should be. Look, I accept there will be politicking this year. I accept we have an election. But if I'm being brutally honest, my mind hasn't been particularly focused on that to date.
Her mind may have to focus on it soon. Judith Collins is certainly focused, and her caucus, leaving Parliament today, are focused too.
She's got it all under control. We're back on track.
We are completely united around our new leadership team.
We're looking to the future now.
Can't wait to get into it.
Not long to wait now. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
Whole neighbourhoods or regions could be put back into lockdown if we see a community outbreak of COVID-19. The Prime Minister today laid out Cabinet's plan if the virus managed to slip through the border and into the community. It comes as 2 more cases are reported in managed isolation in Rotorua today, and there's pleas from the government to get everyone doing their bit by registering and actually using the New Zealand COVID Tracer app. Here's political reporter Yvette McCullough.
It's been 75 days since the last case of community transmission, but Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is warning that with cases still surging around the world, the threat has far from passed. She says while the focus is on ensuring our border is watertight, perfection in a pandemic is not possible.
Even those countries that have been in a position like New Zealand, every single one of them have seen cases re-emerge. We must plan for any eventuality, and what I'm setting out today is such a plan.
That plan, using the alert level system to contain and ring-fence local or regional outbreaks. Lockdown restrictions could be enforced at a neighbourhood, city or regional level, with roadblocks and cordons put in place to stop people travelling in and out. Widespread testing, such as the door-to-door community testing seen in Victoria, could also be used.
In practical terms, that means doing absolutely everything possible to avoid the entire country returning to alert levels 3 or 4 as a measure of last resort.
Ms Ardern says the government would likely consider a nationwide lockdown again if there were multiple clusters across the country. However, she says all of this will be guided by the science and on the underlying assumption that they know for sure local outbreaks are contained.
Where we don't have full information, we will take a precautionary approach and then scale back as needed, rather than run the risk of doing too little too late.
The plan has support from the opposition, with National leader Judith Collins saying it's important to recognise pandemics happen in waves.
Certainly we've seen it in Australia. Any laxness around the quarantine issues can result in a second wave, and these can be very serious. So I think she's right to think about a plan on it. I don't see anything wrong with that. It's always the execution that gets in.
Fast contact tracing is a big part of this plan, and the government is driving home the need for New Zealanders to do their bit by using the COVID Tracer app. Uptake of the app has been poor, with just under 600,000 people registered to it and only a tiny fraction scanning the QR codes. Health Minister Chris Hipkins says in the face of potential community transmission, that's not good enough. He's encouraging businesses to display QR codes and isn't ruling out making this compulsory. But he says it also comes down to people taking personal responsibility.
It is reliant on all of us playing our role. We all need to be diligent about that. You know, even I have to confess, in recent weeks, I have not been as diligent at scanning in everywhere as I need to be. I've stepped up my game on that, and I encourage every other New Zealander to do the same.
However, Judith Collins says the app isn't user-friendly and the public are getting mixed messages from the government.
I tried to use it about 2 weeks ago, and then I thought, oh, come on, I couldn't even make it work. So people are now not using it so much because after all, we're not in lockdown, are we? And I thought the borders were secure, aren't they?
Chris Hipkins says the all-of-government team is working on a plan to try get New Zealanders using the app. He says while for many, life feels like it's back to normal, it's critical that the risk of COVID-19 doesn't fade to the back of people's minds. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Yvette McCullough.
A Christchurch community is reeling after a tragic house fire killed 2 young children. Emergency services were called to Vivian Street in Burwood at about 11:15 last night. But by the time they got there, the house was well ablaze. Fire and emergency say the victims were an 8-year-old boy and an 8-month-old baby. They refused to confirm the gender of the baby, but it has been reported she was a girl. Our Christchurch reporter Anand Zaki filed this report.
Vivian Street resident Eddie Rodden got out of bed to witness a chaotic scene last night.
Smoke coming out of the house, I don't know where it was from, but large smoke and people coming and going, and a woman, I think it's the mother of the 2 children, I think she was quite distressed, but the ambulance people were with her and helping her, and they arrived with blankets to keep everyone warm.
Mr. Rodden says he didn't really know the family as they had moved in recently, but his thoughts go out to them.
Any loss of life is quite dramatic, really. It's sad, particularly with children. I mean, who wants to see a child being hurt or abused in any way?
Fire and Emergency Assistant Area Commander Mike Bowden says 5 people were in the house at the time of the fire. The father and 2 other children managed to escape, with smoke alarms believed to have contributed to their survival. Mr. Bowden says by the time fire crews arrived, the fire had taken hold.
The first crews arrived at the scene at 10:47 and were faced with a well-involved house fire. 1 child was rescued by firefighters during search and rescue operations. Tragically, this child subsequently passed away. A further deceased child was located in an unsurvivable bedroom.
Mr. Bowden says the baby's bedroom had the greatest fire intensity, and initial indications are that's where the fire started, but investigations are yet to confirm that. He says the 8-year-old boy that died after being rescued was in a doorway outside the baby's bedroom. Support is being given to nearby families and first responders.
Obviously, the very main focus is, of course, with the family involved themselves. But, you know, these things impact on neighbours who are there. It's very traumatic for them. And the ambulance, the police and fence staff are all, our first responders tend to be young family people with children of a very similar age.
The police are also involved in the investigation into the deadly fire. Canterbury Metro Area Commander Lane Todd encouraged people to find support if needed.
If we haven't been able to interview some of those neighbours yet and people are feeling very stressed and overwhelmed by it, which could be understandable, just really encourage people to actually reach out. So whether that's through your wider family or through a GP or through the local DHB, we'd really encourage you to do that rather than wait if we haven't got to you yet.
Fire and Emergency say they expect investigators to be on site until at least late tomorrow. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Anand Zaki.
It is almost 19 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The new leader of the National Party will be joining us in the next half hour. Get in touch with your questions. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. We'd also love to hear from you about whether you're using that New Zealand COVID-19 app, tracing app that the government is now asking everybody to sign up to. Are you using it? Is it working well for you? Let us know. 2101 on the text. Kaipara District Council is being accused of wasting public money after pouring millions of dollars into its pursuit of rates rebels. Bruce and Heather Rogan almost lost their house over the long-running dispute, which saw hundreds of residents refuse to pay levies after a massive cost blowout on a council project. Meanwhile, the district's mayor is defending the council's use of ratepayer money to fund legal proceedings. Our reporter Nick Trubridge has the story.
How much would you spend to make a buck? For Kaipara District Council, the answer is a lot. Checkpoint can reveal the embattled local authority has spent over $2 million pursuing rates rebels Bruce and Heather Rogan and other members of the Mangawhai Ratepayers and Residents Association over a rates dispute spanning over a decade. Of that, just under $345,000 has been spent running proceedings involving the Rogans alone. Mr. Rogan believes the council has effectively used a sledgehammer to crack a nut.
They went to the district court to sue us for effectively $2,500, and they spent $344,000 in order to get that money.
Let's rewind briefly. The Rogans were among hundreds of Kaipara ratepayers who halted payments after their council failed to consult them over a $25 million budget blowout on a new sewerage system. The High Court ruled it would have deemed the rates levied for that system invalid, had Parliament not passed a bill validating them. The Rogans and their fellow ratepayers then offered to pay their rates, minus the penalties also owed.
And we said, well, that's all you're getting. We're not prepared to pay the penalties because the rates were invalid, even though you've had them fixed by the government. We're not paying penalties on them. That's totally unfair.
The Rogans and their allies felt it was a fair settlement. KDC disagreed. The council returned those payments and sued residents for rates plus penalties, with the Rogans becoming a test case. In May, after years traversing the courts, the Rogans waved the white flag, paying nearly $115,000 in penalties and court costs. But Mr. Rogan says there was never any question he'd pay his rates, and therefore KDC essentially spent hundreds of thousands, and that's not accounting for staff time, chasing penalties totalling much less.
My view of it is that all they got was the penalties, which was around about, $10,000 or something like that, because there was never any question that we would pay the rates. They knew that we would pay the rates. They knew that we had paid the rates.
On top of the money spent pursuing the Rogans alone, KDC has also spent upwards of $1.7 million on cases involving both the Rogans and the Mangawhai Residents and Ratepayers Association. While the Rogan case has been settled, Kaipara District Mayor Jason Smith says the council remains out of pocket, with two other parties yet to pay up. Mr. Smith says he is comfortable with the council's legal spend.
I am confident that everything that Kaipara District Council's done here has been appropriate, that it's acted appropriately in the best interests of all of the ratepayers of Kaipara District.
Despite the fact council ignored the Rogans' initial settlement offer of rates minus penalties, Smith says the council has been forced to defend subsequent proceedings initiated by the couple. Money from various council budgets was diverted to cover the cost.
In this case, the simple fact is that there were rates and there were penalties, and they needed to be paid, just as everyone else pays their rates and their penalties, because it's a matter of equity and the principle of that equity with all the other ratepayers of Kaipara District.
KDC was initially hesitant to respond to Checkpoint's requests for its spending on the Rogan case, saying doing so would impact council staff's normal operations.
We can undertake this work and estimate it will take staff 2.5 hours to do this.
It then went further, asking Radio New Zealand to transfer money into the council coffers.
If you wish staff to proceed with your request, please deposit $114 into our account with the reference Lagoima Trubridge.
But KDC eventually caved, saying it recognised there is a wider public interest in releasing the public cost of a saga it's desperate to forget. For Checkpoint, Nick Trubridge.
COVID-19 has forced Qantas into hibernation when it comes to international routes. The Australian national carrier has sacked about 20% of its workforce, and it's now stopped taking new bookings for international flights until at least March next year. New Zealand could be the exception if the Trans-Tasman bubble gets off the ground. In the meantime, it continues to park up planes as some state borders close too. Aviation commentator Jeffrey Thomas says it's a move that puts the idea of a Trans-Tasman travel bubble in trouble.
Look, it is very grim, and one of the things that we're hoping for is that maybe we can do a travel bubble which involves Western Australia, the Northern Territory and New Zealand, and exclude New South Wales and Victoria until such time as they get the COVID cases down to zero.
Scott Morrison doesn't seem entirely enthusiastic about the situation, though, does he? So is there actual real hope there in Australia that it's going to happen?
Well, there's a lot of hope that will happen. There's a lot of push in the community because people want to travel and we need travel as an economic enabler for the tourism industry. So, look, we can't stay in isolation forever. We have to get moving and we have to sort of work around these issues. But yes, there's in the community, a lot of people want to travel and they want to travel to New Zealand or even around Australia.
In terms of Qantas, is it a cheaper option for them to park up their planes than operate way below capacity on these international routes?
Oh, look, absolutely. Operating an aeroplane, burning all that fuel is extremely expensive. Plus, you've got all the crew costs. There's no chance that they're going to operate them at a loss. And they simply, we've got transcontinental flights at the moment with 10 passengers on board or 20 passengers on board. You can't, you'll go out of business very quickly doing that.
So where do they put these planes in the meantime? Literally.
Well, they're parked around the country. Some are at Avalon, other ones are at Alice Springs. Typically, if you're going to store them in the long term, you want to go to somewhere that's dry. So a lot of planes are going to the Californian desert. There's lots of aircraft parks there which are set up for cocooning aeroplanes and maintaining those aeroplanes, because that's a very big part of it. There's a lot of day-to-day or week-to-week maintenance required to make sure these aeroplanes are kept in perfect condition. So you need the facilities, the engineering facilities, to make that happen.
So, Jeffrey, in essence, in terms of international business, Qantas is going into hibernation, isn't it?
Look, very much so, and Qantas and Air New Zealand, for that matter as well, are largely doing that, whereas the rest of the world, where the philosophy appears to be suppression of COVID is acceptable and we'll live with that, the rest of the world is actually really travelling. Air travel globally is now approximately 50% of what it was pre-COVID times. So the United States, China, Europe, they're all travelling. Australia and New Zealand are not.
So it has bounced back a bit, because at its worst, wasn't the International Airline Association saying it was 90% of what it was pre-COVID? Yep. So there has been a significant bounce back.
There has been a very significant bounce back. You're right, it was 90% down. Now it's about 45 to 50% down, depending on where you are. But in Australia and New Zealand, I would imagine it's still down in the 10 to 15% bracket. It appears to be going to stay that way for the foreseeable future, unless there's a change in philosophy.
Well, when you say that, obviously Qantas is reviewing its international flight situation around July of 2021. Is that realistic, do you think?
Look, there's so many dynamics to this. It's extremely hard to pick it. I mean, it must be a nightmare for the management of Air New Zealand and for Qantas trying to work out. I mean, just only minutes ago, the Northern Territory in Australia has banned anybody from New South Wales from flying there. I mean, these decisions are being made on a daily basis. These airlines need to make decisions on monthly or 3 monthly basis, because bringing an aeroplane out of cocoon, for instance, you've got a Boeing 777 or a 787 that's cocooned. It's 1,000 man-hours of work to bring that out of its cocoon state. So there's a lot of things to factor in. Then you've got crew that are out of hours, so they've got to go back into the simulator and do simulator training sessions. They've got to do refresher courses. There are so many things, so many factors to come to bear in bringing a fleet and its crew back into flying status. They can't do that on a day-to-day basis. It's got to be done on a 3 or 4 month plan basis to do it responsibly and safely.
Are we seeing the end of affordable travel, do you think, because of this pandemic?
Look, it's a very good question. We're seeing two dynamics. Airlines struggling to make money with limited number of people on planes. At the same time, they're trying to stimulate travel. Within Australia, for instance, before Victoria had its COVID bust, Qantas was selling fares from Melbourne to Sydney on Jetstar for $19. So they're trying to stimulate the tourism industry, and the tourism industry is such a big employer and is in such a bad way. We need those cheap fares. In the longer term, I believe that the momentum we've always had of fares becoming more and more affordable will continue, but we're in probably for a year or so of very turbulent fares where sometimes they're very expensive, sometimes they're super cheap. It's going to be hard to pick.
And that is aviation commentator Jeffrey Thomas. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the new National Party leader joins us live. Queenstown is gearing up for a busy summer despite a lack of international visitors, but is time up for freedom camping? The former girlfriend of sex offender Jeffrey Epstein has been denied bail because she's considered an extreme flight risk. And New Zealand has no plans to ban Huawei despite moves to the contrary in the UK. We'd love your feedback about anything you've heard on the program this evening. Some of you are getting in touch about using the COVID-19 Tracer app. Let us know how it's going if you are using that. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Still time if you want to quickly get some questions in for Judith Collins. But now let's get to the headlines with Susanna.
Firefighters have told of finding a baby and 8-year-old at the scene of a fatal Christchurch house fire. Several people escaped the fire, which is thought to have started in a bedroom. Andrew Little says the government won't rule out using future tech from Huawei, despite a move from the UK to ban equipment from the Chinese company from its 5G networks. The minister responsible for the GCSB says an independent regulatory process under the Telecommunications Act makes sure networks are secure. The police are investigating the possible hacking of personal data sent by the police to a research company. The cybercrime team is trying to understand how big the hack could be and the risk it poses. National's Michael Woodhouse says he's disappointed to have been stripped of the health portfolio by the party's new leader Judith Collins. Ms Collins says Mr Woodhouse was too slow to report that he was sent leaked COVID-19 patients' data. National says people aren't using the COVID Tracer app as it's difficult to use, and the government is sending mixed messages considering there's no community transmission. 2 new cases of COVID-19 have been reported today, both from managed isolation facilities in Rotorua. One is a man in his 60s who returned from Pakistan last Friday, and the other is a woman in her 50s who arrived from Dublin the same day. The Department of Conservation is warning those walking on a Cape Kidnappers trail in Hawke's Bay will be risking their lives. The walkway was closed in January 2019 when 2 tourists were seriously injured by a landslide, but reopens at the end of the year. DOC spokesman Hayden Barrett says a GNS report puts the risk of the beach walk higher than rafting or jet boating. The Queenstown Lakes District Council is preparing for an economic boost from campervan visitors this summer. Rental deals have already increased the number of campervan tourists, and they hope to provide more camping spaces. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. And let's get down to the business news with Nona Peltier, who joins me in the studio. Let's talk about power, Nona. Electricity Authority, it's been taken to court over changes it wants to make to pricing. Okay, so who's marching them into court?
It's Trustpower this time. And really, this is a saga. This has been going on for ages. And this really goes back to the concerns that it stems from TY Point's concerns raised years ago about the cost of transmission from Manapuri to the smelter. Very closely in proximity to each other. So why so much money? Southland agreed and pushed for a change in the way that the pricing was done for transmission. The Electricity Authority tried once to make a change. That was pushed back, and they started again, went back to the drawing board, came up with a new plan, and now Trustpower is saying, still no good. Basically, what it means is that if you live in Southland, you might get a deal on your power in terms of the transmission costs, maybe $80 a year savings, but those costs will be spread across the North Island. And Trustpower provides power, well, it's based in the central part of the North Island, and it's saying that those costs will be taken up by the people, its customers, and it's taking the case to court. And not only that, but they're saying that the Electricity Authority has been heavy-handed in the way that it's prescribed how Transpower should come up with a pricing methodology for how the pricing should be done. And so as a result of that, they're saying that there's two things. One, the Electricity Authority has got it wrong. And two, they're being heavy-handed. So that case is going to go to court. And it's just Trustpower. But it's not the only one that's opposing this. We've heard from other power companies that are not happy. So look, this is another chapter in this long-running battle. And now that TY is closing down next year, you wonder, well, is this necessary? I guess there'll be a lot of question marks around that.
Okay. This is interesting, this next story. Spark, stepping up efforts to get landline phones off the copper network. Two questions. Who has a landline and what is Spark doing?
Well, as a matter of fact, a lot of people do have a landline. In fact, we use landlines in a lot of companies and businesses use landlines. But look, 450-some thousand people are still on these really old system, which, okay, it's called now... Technically, it's called the PSTN service. So what it is, it's a service that Spark puts on one side of the copper line and on the other side of the copper line to get your phone calls through. So the copper lines themselves are a Chorus, they belong to Chorus. But the service that sends the voices back and forth, that's Spark. So this is a service called PSTN. And it was developed in the 80s, so we're talking a long time ago. And they haven't been manufacturing parts for it for 17 years. So
she's getting a bit ropey.
A little bit so, yes, indeed. So they have a different kind of service now. What they're trying to do is, so if you have a landline and you live in Miramar in Wellington or in Devonport in Auckland, you're going to be the first to get onto this new system. Although there are other people that are on it, but Spark is forcing these people to take it up. So in the past, you could opt into a better service. Now, no, Spark is saying enough is enough. You people, you're moving no matter whether you like it or not.
And is it going to be better? I mean, in what way? Do we know?
It's not necessarily better. It's just that at least they can maintain it.
Right.
And so when you pick up your phone, you won't notice that you don't have the same copper wire service that you used to have. But you'll still be able to make your call in the old way.
Okay. What's been going on the markets today, Nona?
It's been interesting. So there was, I'm not sure whether or not we've been talking about what's been happening in the China-US ongoing trade war and tit for tat, what have yous. Well, anyways, Donald Trump, he passed an order, I guess yesterday, which is going to penalize companies that do business with Chinese authorities who impose the new security sanctions against Hong Kong. This is very serious. And the Chinese have gone, really? Okay, we're going to retaliate. Well, that's had a pretty, I guess, it's damped down the enthusiasm for Asian stocks and things in China and really just about everywhere. But not in New Zealand. No. And not in Australia. Our index, the top 50 index, it closed up 1%, 116 points up today. That's a gain to 11,611. The ASX 200 is up 1.7%, so really good day for New Zealand and Australia. The New Zealand dollar is steady at 65.5 US cents, and it's down slightly against the Australian dollar at 93.6 Australian and 52.1 British pounds, which is where it's been stuck really for a long time.
For a while, yeah. Yep. Thanks, Nona. That's Nona Palcio with our business news. And sticking with business and phone technology, New Zealand won't ban Huawei equipment despite a move in the UK to purge the Chinese company's gear from its 5G mobile networks. The ruling follows sanctions imposed by the US, which claim the firm poses a national security threat, something Huawei denies. Now, the UK Parliament has heard that by 2027, it will be illegal to use 5G infrastructure components from Huawei. Rachel Thomas reports.
It's a move that could cost £2 billion or 4 billion New Zealand dollars and will delay the rollout of 5G in the UK. But some think the UK government's decision to ban the use of Huawei technology is about more than just the company. Global security analyst Dr. Paul Buchanan believes the decision could be more to do with the wider diplomatic stoush over China's handling of COVID-19 and Hong Kong's democracy protests. And New Zealand should be reconsidering its relationship too.
There are serious suspicions that they're just not honest brokers, that they use their inclusion in the world trade regimes to advantage themselves at the expense of others, and they simply don't play by the same rules as everybody else. So I think that New Zealand, because of its vulnerabilities, needs to reconsider its trade relationship with China, because that will not go back to the way it was before February.
But in a statement, the minister responsible for the GCSB, Andrew Little, said the government won't rule out using future tech from the Chinese telco.
New Zealand does not ban any telecommunications vendor. We do, however, have a well-established and independent regulatory process to ensure the security of our networks under the Telecommunications Act. The Act has been in place since 2014 and works well. We are confident that New Zealand's telecommunications networks are secure and that our regulatory model serves New Zealanders well.
Andrew Little says every decision is made on a case-by-case basis and in accordance with New Zealand laws. Tech commentator Bill Bennett says Huawei has not yet shown it can meet those standards.
Huawei didn't pass the test at the first time round, and that, although everyone goes out of their way to tell you that's not a ban, that in effect bans it from the network until they pass those tests. So we're already in the not going to be buying Huawei camp.
He says that could all change if governments change, both in New Zealand and overseas. Currently, no telco providers are using Huawei technology as part of their 5G networks in New Zealand, with Vodafone and Spark both working with Nokia. But Spark and 2 Degrees have refused to say whether they'd rule out partnering with Huawei for 5G networks in the future. The Telecommunications Users Association Chief Executive, Craig Young, says a ban in New Zealand would mean less competition.
If the New Zealand government follows suit, that the number of providers that could provide services in New Zealand is reduced, and so therefore the competitive tension that occurs at that level when you're buying network, it won't be as strong as it would have been before. When you think about end users and their access to well-priced services, that's where the concern comes in.
He says 2G, 3G and 4G networks are integrated, so a ban would force companies with Huawei equipment in their core network, like 2 Degrees, to replace expensive hardware. In a statement, Huawei New Zealand's Deputy Managing Director, Andrew Bowter, says the company has been in the New Zealand market for 15 years and remains committed to its customers. Mr. Bowter says it wants to help the COVID recovery by ensuring Huawei's networks work well. For Checkpoint, Rachel Thomas.
A Hawke's Bay tour operator is accusing the Department of Conservation of exaggerating the dangers at Cape Kidnappers. The walkway around the Cape, which has been closed since January 2019, when 2 tourists were seriously injured by a landslide, will reopen at the end of the year. But DOC is warning the area is still unstable and those who use the walkway are risking their lives. Tom Kitchen has the story.
The landslide that swept 2 tourists into the ocean has buried Colin Lindsay's business, Gannett Beach Adventures, for the last 18 months. He's longing to get back to the Cape, taking tourists on vintage tractors to the famous Gannett colony. but that is likely to be several months away yet. A report released today by GNS Science on the area rates the risk of walking along the beach as higher than rafting and jet boating or visiting Fox or Franz Josef Glacier. The Department of Conservation says that's a higher risk than expected, but Mr Lindsay disagrees and says the track should have opened months ago.
It's the case of the Department of Conservation spin doctors, taking the report and tweaking it to suit their sort of agenda, I guess you could say.
A second report released today by the consultancy firm Stantec on the hazards at Cape Kidnappers has found 3 instances of beach users being struck by landslides in 1973, 1998 and 2019, and no deaths. About 15,000 tourists a year visit the beach in Cape. DOC's Lower North Island Operations Manager Hayden Barrett says they plan to reopen the area at the end of the year, but the GNS report shows the risk remains high.
So that was a bit more extreme than what we thought. And as a result, we've made a decision to reduce the level of track standard that we're going to be providing to our visitors, and really inform them about that level of risk and leave it up to them to decide whether they're willing to accept that before using the site.
The GNS report says visiting the Gannets is just less than the eruption risk than walking the Tongariro Alpine Crossing. Associate Professor Martin Brooke of Auckland's University School of Environment says it's fair enough for DOC to reopen the track, but people have to know what they're doing.
People have been sort of mitigating the risk themselves, I guess, in response to what's going on in the cliff. So I guess it comes down to your perception of risk, ultimately.
The Hastings District Council manages a part of the beach where last year's landslip happened. Its asset manager, Craig Few, says it'll work with DOC to mitigate the risks, but he wants to stress it's not a walk in the park.
It's not just a standard day walker. It is more targeted as someone who's walking, who can assess, manage those risks, and is fully aware of it.
There's no set date for reopening the track, but DOC say it should be done later this year. For Checkpoint, this is Tom Kitchen.
It is 5:45. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. As always, we'd love to hear from you on anything you've heard on the program this evening. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's head offshore now to the US. President Trump has outlined a litany of complaints against China as he announced the signing of an executive order stripping Hong Kong of its preferential economic treatment from the US. The president says the people of Hong Kong have had their freedoms taken away by the leadership in Beijing.
Today I also signed an executive order ending US preferential treatment for Hong Kong. Hong Kong will now be treated the same as mainland China. No special privileges, no special economic treatment, and no export of sensitive technologies. In addition to that, as you know, we're placing massive tariffs and have placed very large tariffs on China. First time that's ever happened to China.
The president also dismissed the prospects of an immediate resumption of trade talks with Beijing. He ruled out a meeting with President Xi Jinping, renewed his attacks on China's trade practices and blamed it for unleashing coronavirus on the world. The BBC's Peter Bowes has more.
It was an announcement about Hong Kong and China that lasted just a few moments, but then the news conference, very long, typical of Donald Trump, went on for over an hour, and it did have more of a feel of a campaign rally of the likes that we're going to see over the next few weeks and months. But on Hong Kong, it was condemnation of the actions of China against Hong Kong. Of course, we've seen the most sweeping changes of the political landscape in Hong Kong since 1997, when the territory was handed over from the UK. And that condemnation was expected from Donald Trump. It essentially gives his sign of, or his signature of approval to legislation that was passed in the US Congress earlier this month. And also, and perhaps most significantly, especially for those people trading between the United States and Hong Kong, the ending of the special privileges status, which has made it easier for business to take place, trade to take place between Hong Kong and the United States. From now on, Hong Kong will be treated in exactly the same way as mainland China. And therein lies the big issue, the big picture, because there's a war of words going on between China and the United States, specifically Donald Trump, of course, blaming China for not slowing down, not warning the world about the coronavirus, and saying that Beijing was responsible for the rapid spread of the virus. And Donald Trump used this press conference to express all those grievances as well. And in terms of the politics, also attacking his political rival Joe Biden and questioning what it's going to be like under a potential President Biden in terms of his relations with China.
And that was the BBC's Peter Bowes. Let's circle back to our top story now. Day one as National Party leader, and Judith Collins has already shuffled one of her senior MPs sideways. The former health spokesperson, Michael Woodhouse, has been stripped of the portfolio over his handling of private health information. He was leaked by former party president Michelle Bogue. He didn't use the information about COVID patients, but he didn't immediately come clean about the situation either. The new leader of the National Party joins me now. Good evening, Judith. Have you got used to being called the leader of the National Party yet, or do you think, oh, they're talking to me?
Yes, I'm a bit like that, Lisa, and I'm wondering, sometimes I think, oh gosh, it's so exciting, but it's a tough job, and it requires tough decisions. And, well, you may have made one today. Michael Woodhouse, the portfolio reshuffle, well, he's had it taken off him. Is that a punishment? No, it's an acknowledgement that Michael could have handled that better, in my opinion. He and I have sat down, we've talked about it. He's an outstanding MP, and I think this was very unfortunate. But also, I'm thinking of the 18 people whose private medical records were provided, certainly to Hamish Walker, but also Michael had similar information, and he didn't act on it, but he didn't do anything to stop it coming to him or anyone else, and I think that is a real shame. So he, however, has picked up two new portfolios today. One is regional development and the other is Pike River recovery, which is very important because he was in fact the minister in charge of the health and safety legislation. I'm a bit confused. What's the difference between an acknowledgement and a punishment? Because you took something off him. Is he not getting a dressing down? Is this not a demotion? Well, we talked about it, talked about the issue. I have no problem with Michael's competence or his work ethic. The issue is that I would have preferred him to have dealt with this differently. I was not then the leader, and I believe it is something that does need to be addressed. We cannot have people's personal medical records being used in this way. And I know, that just because Ms Bogue was once, 20 years ago, the president of the National Party for a very short period of time, that does not make it okay, and it will not be countenanced. Is he still going to be at number 7 in the rankings? I'm doing the reshuffle, the minor reshuffle, almost as we speak. I'm going back to work on that again. There are several people who I've got to sort of work out where they're going to go and which portfolios they're having. I think it's already been signalled widely that Simon Bridges will be back with great portfolios in the front bench position. I think it's really important. I've also talked today with Todd Muller, the outgoing leader, about his wishes and what he would like and how we can accommodate that. So I am very committed to us having a united team and going. But you can't say yet whether Michael Woodhouse will still stay at number 7 or whether he'll slide from that spot. Well, I'm not saying that because there's still decisions to be made about everybody in the team, and I'm not making those announcements one by one. I am announcing the reshuffle tomorrow, the results of that. Michael was aware that we're announcing this particular issue today, and he is fully aware of that. So have you just done this to stem criticism of the situation with Michael Woodhouse, to deal with the problem without actually demoting him? Because you've given him regional economic development in Pike River. It's almost like he's being rewarded for his misstep. Well, no, he's not. He's not, because he has been a very passionate advocate in terms of the health and portfolio. This is something that he takes very seriously, but he is also a very competent MP, and I'm not going to go into this election not acknowledging the merit that he brings to the role of being a Member of Parliament and an experienced minister. So it is important. This was a misstep, but everybody makes mistakes, and I think that we need to be very understanding of that too, and I can think of some of the circumstances around this particular case where he may have acted differently if the information might have come from another source. Okay, you have indicated that you won't tolerate dirty politics. So what's your definition of dirty politics? Where's the line in the sand? We're not going to use people's personal information for a start. That's, I don't like this going after people's families. We're not going to have any of that. I've made it very clear to our caucus that other politicians, their families are completely out of bounds, as they all accepted and were absolutely, very pleased with. So these are the sorts of things we're not going to do. We're not going to go and do dirty tricks like that. The point is that these records are personal to the people, that they belong to. There was no reason at all for us to hold them. What was important is, if they had been released, is to let the Minister of Health know that they had been released. Yes, that can be a story about the issue of these records not being password protected, but just passing them around like Ms. Bogue did was very unfortunate.
So only those two things? No use of personal information and no bringing families into it?
Well, we're not going to do that. There's obviously...
Any other thing on the no-go list?
Well, there'll be lots of things, but
like what?
I think it's really important that we need to be focused on the people of New Zealand. We're not going to go after people. What we're going to do is focus very much on what is important for New Zealanders. We're 2 months out from an election. We're going into the worst economic crisis that this country has seen for 100 years. We're not going to be focused on anything other than holding the government to account and putting up much better policies than they have.
Are you going ahead with the same back office team that Todd Muller had? Janet Wilson, Michael Hooton, are they still part of your team now?
There have been no significant changes at all in the staff. We're 2 months out from election. They're all people who have worked very, very hard for Todd. And I've made it very clear that I'm not going to have wholesale changes in anybody's employment if I can possibly help it. It's simply not credible to change staff, but also I know that they've been working very hard and they understand the rules.
Okay, let's talk about what voters might be able to expect in terms of policy positions. You describe yourself as the low tax party. So do you see on the horizon an adjustment of income tax brackets?
We'll just have to wait for that one because we've got some other announcements coming up very soon.
Which ones would those be?
Well, there's going to be a major announcement tomorrow.
On?
And, well, we'll be popping out.
Just give us a topic heading. Just give us a topic heading.
I think we all know we have to build the economy, and there's going to be a quite significant, actually very significant announcement on that. Sorry, not tomorrow, it'll be Friday, sorry. And it's really important that we have some policies that are positive for the country and that people can understand that we're actually ready to govern.
So have you made a decision on income tax and you're just not announcing it, or no decision yet within the party?
Well, we haven't announced our tax policies. We're not talking about wholesale tax cuts or anything like that. I've made it very clear that we're not the party that's increasing taxes. I want to rule that out. We're not increasing taxes. And I'd say that other major parties might like to rule that out too, and I am ruling that out.
Shane Reti has said that it's time to bring overseas students back. Do you agree, and how would you work isolation requirements?
Well, there are very real issues around the isolation requirements, but it's not impossible. That means testing before they come, after they come, quarantine that actually works. These are all ways that this can be done. And by the way, quarantine at their own cost. So these are things that can be put in place.
And when would you like to have that in place by?
When we have confidence that quarantine means quarantine for everybody. We can't have people escaping from quarantine.
There's no different a timeline to what the government's offering.
Well, they're the ones telling us they've got quarantine sorted.
So you're saying, no, you wouldn't bring students in right now?
Once we know that they've got that sorted, the quarantine. It's very important that we do not open up borders unless they are safe.
Centre of politics, you have said, is often where people go when they can't make a policy decision, and it's potentially where votes are lost. So you're the leader now. Can we expect National to shuffle a little bit to the right?
On some things, and on other things, no. You're going to see us move on particular positions depending on what we think is the right thing to do for the country, given the extraordinary circumstances economically that we're going to find ourselves in, and particularly when the
okay, so which ones, Judith? Sorry to interrupt, but we're coming up to the news and I want to hear this. So which ones do you think you're going to move further to the right on?
anything that works, and I wouldn't get too caught up in the left and the right. We are a party of principle, and we're in one of those principles. It has to be right for New Zealanders. So just have to wait for some of these policies. Big announcement this Friday.
OK, let's go through some quickly with time not on our side. Will you bring back sanctions on beneficiaries?
We haven't announced anything on that, and you'll have to wait for that policy.
Would you routinely arm police?
Oh, well, we never have, but we have always, actually, since I was the Minister of Police some years ago, allowed police to make those decisions around lockboxes and cars, and they're arming police in front line when they decide that it's the right thing to do. We've got to be very, very aware that most New Zealanders do not want fully armed police on a routine basis, but at the same time, New Zealand police are not to be shot at and are not to be victims like that.
Do you still support social investment policies as defined by the former leader, Bill English?
Yes, I do. I think social investment policy is something which makes a huge difference for people. The problem is it was brought in a bit late. We were dealing with the GFC, global financial crisis, and I think that we have a uniform view on that is that it's a good idea to help people to get out of poverty, not to keep them in it.
You've got 15 seconds, Judith. Some people in Christchurch are not pleased that Jerry Brownlee is your number 2. They say it's an up yours to the people of Christchurch who don't think that he did a good job in his position rebuilding the city. Your response to them?
Well, Jerry Brownlee has spent years on the rebuild of that city. I know what he went through personally as well as professionally. I couldn't think of a better person to be the
Out of time.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata with tēnei. Andrew Little says the government won't rule out using future tech from Huawei despite a move from the UK to ban equipment from the Chinese company from its 5G networks. The minister responsible for the GCSB says New Zealand does not ban any telecommunications vendor. He says New Zealand's independent regulatory process under the Telecommunications Act makes sure networks are secure. Mr Little says the government is confident New Zealand's telecommunications networks are secure and that the Act works well. Huawei has previously failed to meet the requirements of the Act for 5G in New Zealand. A technology commentator says there's no evidence the Chinese government is using Huawei to spy on other countries, but there is a risk it could be weaponised in other ways. Bill Bennett says Britain's move to purge Huawei equipment from its 5G network could be partly driven by pressure from the United States rather than security concerns. But he says that spying is not the biggest risk.
China could just pull the plug on the telephone network. You know, they can stop providing support. And suddenly you've got this kind of technological Trojan horse inside your country when you might not be at war with China, but it might be like the Cold War between the West and Russia. That does impact security, and that would impact our security.
Bill Bennett says Huawei has yet to prove it can meet New Zealand's cybersecurity standards. Firefighters have spoken of the trauma following the deaths of 2 young children in a house fire in Christchurch. Emergency services were called to the fire on Vivian Street in Burwood at about 11:15 last night. Fire and Emergencies Mike Bowden says they managed to rescue an 8-year-old boy, but he later died. The body of an 8-month-old baby was found in a bedroom where the fire appears to have started. Mr Bowden says fatal fires are traumatic and many emergency staff have children themselves. National MP Michael Woodhouse has expressed his disappointment that new party leader Judith Collins has stripped him of the health portfolio. Ms Collins made the decision today because of Mr Woodhouse's involvement in the leak of private information about COVID-19 patients. Mr Woodhouse says he wanted to be health minister if National won the 2020 election, but has been given the Pike River Recovery and Regional Economic Development portfolios. Dr Shane Reti takes over the health portfolio. Ms Collins will announce a reshuffle of the party's caucus tomorrow. She says she is still allocating portfolios for the reshuffle, which will fall exactly 2 weeks since the last.
I've just got a few things to work through and a few phone calls. I must say it's more difficult being on the divvying up end than it is being on the receiving end, isn't it?
Judith Collins plans on being the party's national security spokesperson. The Health Minister hasn't ruled out forcing businesses to display codes for contact tracing apps. Just under 600,000 people have registered for the official New Zealand COVID Tracer app, which Mr Hipkins says isn't enough. Chris Hipkins says based on the evidence so far, if new cases emerge in the community, not enough people will be able to remember their movements for officials to efficiently contact trace. Mr Hipkins says officials are considering options, including requiring all businesses to display a QR code. Qantas has stopped taking new bookings for international flights until at least March next year. The Australian national carrier has also let about 20% of its workforce go. Flights to New Zealand are not available until the 1st of September in the hope of a trans-Tasman bubble. Aviation commentator Geoffrey Thomas has told Checkpoint that in the meantime Qantas has parked up its planes.
They're parked around the country. Some are at Avalon, other ones are at Alice Springs. Typically, if you're going to store them in the long term, you want to go to somewhere that's dry. So a lot of planes are going to the Californian desert.
Geoffrey Thomas. It's 4 minutes past 6. The departure of 4 players from the Warriors means the Rugby League club is now searching for replacement players to see out the NRL season. Ken Maumalo, David Fusitua, Ignatius Parsi and King Vuniyayawa will leave the side's Australia base on Monday week after their match against the Sydney Roosters. The club had been told the NRL would get government exemptions for their families to join them from New Zealand. That hasn't happened, so the players are heading home. The Warriors are already 5 players down heading into their last 9 games and are nursing a number of injuries. Club Chief Executive Cameron George says organising lone players won't be easy.
Those positions that are being vacated by these guys going home certainly compounds an already skinny roster in those areas.
Cameron George. The Breakers coach Dan Shamir says they have gained a quality player in new signing Ty Webster without having to use up an import spot. The Tall Blacks guard played for the club as a teenager in 2013 before heading to the US to play college basketball. He's been playing in Europe for the past couple of years and had expected to return, but the pandemic put paid to those plans. Shamir says with the number of imports now reduced to 2 per club, signing Webster is a major boost.
We've added a player who's potentially one of the best players on any team, especially with the movement this year to 2 imports. Having a local player like that puts us one more step towards building a team that can be a contender.
Dan Shamir of the Breakers. That's the news.
I'm Catherine Ryan. On 9 to noon tomorrow, Local Government Minister Nanaia Mahuta on the multi-billion-dollar overhaul of our ailing water sector and the challenging discussions ahead. Calls in Australia for purpose-built managed isolation facilities to replace hotels. Crazy Rich Asians author Kevin Kwan on his new novel, paying homage to a classic. Join me on 9 to noon on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, rain with possible downpours turning to showers tomorrow morning. Easterly gales easing tomorrow morning also. Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, periods of rain with possible downpours tomorrow. Easterlies rising to gale tonight before easing tomorrow evening. Waikato to Taranaki, including Bay of Plenty, Central High Country, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Periods of rain with heavy falls about Western Bay of Plenty. Strong gusty easterlies, gale about eastern Waikato tomorrow. Whanganui to Wellington, also Waitatapa. Mostly cloudy, a few showers in Wellington and Waitatapa at times. For Marlborough, Canterbury and eastern Otago, mostly cloudy with patchy drizzle, clearing for a time tomorrow afternoon. Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland, also inland Otago and Southland. Mainly fine with high cloud, but persistent low cloud about some inland valleys and basins. Chatham Islands, a few showers. RNZ National. It's 7 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint, and I'm Lisa Owen. Judith Collins' rapid promotion to National Party leader has delighted most voters we spoke to in her Papakura electorate. Some say she should have been made leader well before now. Our reporter Sarah Robson and visual journalist Dan Cook took a drive into Collins country and filed this report.
The common goal is to get rid of the current government.
In less than 24 hours, the MP for Papakura, Judith Collins, has found herself catapulted into the leadership of the National Party. At a suburban shopping centre in the heart of her Auckland electorate, voters aren't surprised by her sudden promotion.
I reckon that she should have been the leader from the beginning anyway, when we changed over. It's good to see her in there. It is really good.
Yeah, I think she's quite strong, yes, with her opinions and whatnot, and she can, whatever the job is that she needs to get done, I think she probably achieves that.
I've met Judith a few times. She's a local MP. I would never vote for her. I think she was the only option, really, to lead the National Party. I think she's a very divisive figure. People either love her or hate her, and there's you can't feel neutral about her.
She seems to be a nice lady, and but we don't meet it often or see her often. But I believe a lot of people think that she's doing a good job for the community, which is great.
Oh, I think it's really, really awesome. She's confident. She's not going to fall apart after a few weeks.
I've been voting for her for the last 20 years, and I have full faith in her.
And so you'll be voting for National again?
Yeah, sure.
2 ticks, Judith Collins and National Party?
Yeah, sure. She's right up here, the office.
And there have been plenty of people getting in touch with Judith Collins' electorate staff to pass on their congratulations.
We have quite a lot of phone calls and constituents visiting, and it's pretty good. And because Judith is so accessible to people, I expect she's got a lot of personal emails and texts as well. Yeah, it's great, isn't it, really?
Judith Collins first entered Parliament back in 2002, winning the then seat of Clevedon. Since 2008, she's been the popular local MP here in the Papakura electorate. In 2017, she retained the seat with a 55% share of the vote. And locals here are rating her chances come September's election.
Yeah, I'd definitely vote for Judith. She's done awesome stuff around here, so...
Good local MP then?
Yeah. Yeah, hands down she wins in here anyway, so...
From what they've had in the last few weeks, not long, this has definitely got to be better. Definitely better.
Do you think it might improve National's chances though?
Oh, definitely.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, definitely.
She could make a good leader. She's been there long enough to know what's going on. And,
Do you think she'd be a good Prime Minister?
Who knows? She could be.
But others aren't so sure Judith Collins will come out on top when she goes up against Jacinda Ardern on polling day.
Yeah, I think, just over the years, I've seen her do quite a lot of bad and that kind of stuff. I've never voted National. I've always been a Labour person, so, but they need someone in there, someone that's going to be a straight shooter.
Well, to be honest with you, normally vote Labour, but it won't change us to National. It won't change me. He has his own decision to make.
It won't change me either.
I think that Jacinda, if she can maintain her calm demeanour and measured and focus more on being kind and not descend to the type of dirty politics, then I think that she should probably win out.
Judith Collins says those days of dirty politics are behind her. But just how bruising this year's election campaign will be, well, there's 66 days to go. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
Have pity on those whose chance is close enough.
And senior National MP Michael Woodhouse has been stripped of the health portfolio by new leader Judith Collins. It comes after Mr Woodhouse met with Ms Collins earlier today to talk about what information he received from former National Party President Michelle Bogue, specifically the private details of COVID-19 patients. Mr Woodhouse returned to his Dunedin home this afternoon and spoke to political reporter Joe Moyer, who started by asking him how he feels about being demoted.
Oh, I'm disappointed. I've loved the health role. I think we have worked hard to highlight shortcomings in the government's COVID response. But I'm also, looking forward now. I've got a couple of very important portfolios, and I'm looking forward to getting my teeth into those. And I know Dr. Shane Reedy will do a great job with health.
Judith did say that it wasn't about trust and it was an error of judgment on your part. Do you think that's a fair summary?
We had a really good chat about the circumstances that came about last week, and I have a great deal of confidence in the leadership, and I'm just pleased that she has confidence in me to be able to work those two other portfolios that are very important.
So what happened in that conversation today with Judith then?
Oh, look, I think that's between me and the leader, but as I say, we had a really good chat, and I'm very excited about still being part of the future, and that's what I'm looking towards.
Was there any information that came to light, though, when you spoke with Judith that perhaps she wasn't aware of that pushed her towards taking that role off you?
Look, we had a really good chat. I don't think it's appropriate to go into the details of that. Suffice it to say, I feel well supported by Judith, and I look forward to the new challenge.
Just looking back to how we got to this point, do you regret the steps and the decisions that you made over the course of the last few weeks, going back to the end of June when you received those emails from Michelle Bowe? Do you regret any of the decisions you made?
Look, I'm not looking back now. I'm looking forward. I've got a really good and exciting portfolio to get my teeth into, and that's what my focus is.
From the public's perspective, what assurance can you give them that you were completely upfront and honest about the steps that you took to make sure that information, people's private details, personal details, weren't being passed on or in the wrong hands?
Look, I've been very upfront about that, but I don't think it's worth going over that. My focus is very much forward-looking.
Do you not want to talk about it because you regret the way that you handled it?
Look, I've been very open about it. I talked in detail about that last week. My focus is now on this week.
And that was National MP Michael Woodhouse speaking to political reporter Joe Moyer. The appointment of Christchurch MP Jerry Brownlee as National's deputy leader has been met with a chorus of outrage from some Cantabrians. Mr Brownlee led the rebuild of Christchurch after the Canterbury earthquakes, but almost 10 years after the quakes, many of the government projects promised, including a new stadium, the Metro Sports Facility and Convention Centre, have not been completed. Many homeowners are still fighting to get their insurance claims sorted, including with EQC and Southern Response, both government agencies that Mr Brownlee was responsible for under the last National government. Logan Church reports.
EQC claimant Jodie Devine was shocked when she heard who the new Deputy National Party leader was.
Speechless, really. To me, it feels like a slap in the face.
Jerry Brownlee led the former National government's rebuild of Christchurch after the earthquakes. Just days ago, when Todd Muller was still leader of the National Party, he praised Mr Brownlee as the man who rebuilt the city. But Ms Devine remembers Mr Brownlee's comments in 2012, when he called Cantabrians unhappy with the government's performance, moaners and carpers.
His comments about being moaners and carpers, that still kind of sits with me. 5 years later, even 10 years later for some people, we're still moaning about it, but we're not really moaning about it. It's been a horrible experience.
Mike Dodge has settled his insurance claim after years of fighting. He was also baffled by Mr Brownlee's promotion.
Quite shocked. I think he's not necessarily the right person. He might suit some areas of the city. He basically rubbished a whole lot of local residents and called them carpers and moaners when all they were trying to do was get a fair repair and code compliant and to the EQC Act and their insurance policies. He just doesn't really sit with the people, I don't think. He may have his group of followers, but the majority of people are not overly impressed with what he did to the rebuild, if you can actually identify anything that he's done.
Today, the new National leader Judith Collins, as well as Jerry Brownlee, have been citing the party's experience dealing with crises as a reason why they would make a good post-COVID government. But former Southern Response claimant Jean Raff questions this.
National with Jerry Brownlee, they're asking us to trust them as voters to build the economic system of the country at a time of international crisis when they couldn't even rebuild one city on South Island.
Several anchor projects promised by the National government haven't been finished, including the Metro Sports Facility, Stadium and Convention Centre. Botched earthquake repairs have cost taxpayers more than $1 billion, and earthquake damage claims are still coming in. One claimant who doesn't want to be named because they are still waiting for their claim to be sorted says the message the National Party is sending is clear.
I think it's a massive up yours to the people of Christchurch. Jerry Brownlee absolutely failed in terms of repairing people's homes in Christchurch. There are thousands of homes that need to have had 3 rounds of repairs. There are still thousands of unsettled insurance claims, and it just angers me that the National MPs feel like he and his record in Christchurch is deserved of an opportunity to be this country's Deputy Prime Minister.
Christchurch leaned hard towards Labour in the 2017 election, with Jerry Brownlee emerging as the only National Party MP in the Christchurch metropolitan area. On the streets of Christchurch today, there was a mixed reaction to Mr Brownlee's appointment as deputy.
From what I remember, he didn't seem to do too much with the earthquakes. There's a lot of talk but not much action. He never seemed, from then I haven't seen him much in doing too much, so good luck to them, I think.
I'm a bit disappointed. He's sort of been there and done that. I think it would have been good if we had someone fresh.
I'm not a Christchurch, I'm not born and bred here, but it doesn't seem like he's super popular here. But yeah, that's all I really know.
Nice to see maybe a familiar face from back when we had those hard times nearly 10 years ago. But yeah, I think there could definitely be a lot worse choices.
Checkpoint has invited Mr Brownlee on the programme this evening. We have not received a response. For Checkpoint, Logan Church.
It's 19 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Across the ditch now, where authorities in Victoria are becoming increasingly annoyed at breaches of the lockdown in force there. The state has recorded another 238 cases in the last 24 hours. And the growing number of cases in New South Wales has now been linked back to Victoria. Our World Watch reporter Annabelle Reid has more.
We're finding people in cupboards, we're finding people in garages. Please stop.
A plea from Victoria Police, fed up with people breaking the rules of the lockdown in place throughout large swathes of the state. They've issued 546 fines since the lockdown was put in place and 63 in just the last 24 hours. Deputy Commissioner Rick Nugent says most infringements are for people leaving their homes to visit family and friends. Police broke up a party in Melbourne late last week and handed out 10 fines. They were called back hours later and issued another 24.
A particular concern for us is the ongoing parties and gatherings. People playing poker, people holding parties.
People are allowed to leave home for food, but one man's been fined for refusing to leave a restaurant.
So clearly KFC is popular during the lockdown. A person ordered KFC and sat in the restaurant and refused to leave.
He was hit with a $1,600 fine, and a game turned expensive for another couple of people.
The reasons for leaving your premises are well known. I can say they don't include playing Pokemon. A couple of mates out in the car travelling around playing Pokemon doesn't fit within those reasons to leave.
4 people were fined for being 55 kilometres from home. They told officers they travelled to charge their phones. And another 40 fines were dished out to people visiting massage parlours, also off limits while the lockdown is in place. Announcing the 238 new cases, the Premier, Daniel Andrews, said the state is still in a precarious position. It's the 4th highest daily increase in Victoria since the pandemic began. 29 of the new cases are related to known outbreaks, but 209 are still under investigation. There are now 105 Victorians with COVID-19 in hospital, and 27 of those are in intensive care.
Where we are is in a very serious and deadly position. These hospitalisation numbers are a great concern to us. We have always been very clear that unless we all pulled together, did the right thing, worked to support each other, then families would be affected, communities would be affected, indeed our entire state.
Meanwhile, there are now 34 COVID cases linked to the Crossroads Hotel in southwest Sydney. New South Wales Health believe a man from Melbourne is likely responsible for sparking the cluster. The man, who works for a freight company, travelled to Sydney on the 30th of June and is thought to have infected several colleagues at his workplace. The group then went to a function at the Crossroads Hotel a few days later. Prime Minister Scott Morrison says the cluster is stable and contained.
What we do know is that the strain genetically that's turned up in New South Wales has come from Victoria. We do know that. And that just means that in terms of community outbreak in New South Wales, that hasn't come from within New South Wales.
More than 14,000 doctors and other healthcare workers have put their hand up to help overstretched Victorian hospitals. And the federal government is providing 500,000 masks to aged care homes. For Checkpoint, Annabelle Reid.
Ghislaine Maxwell, the British socialite and former girlfriend of Jeffrey Epstein, has been denied bail because she's considered an extreme flight risk. Ms Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to charges of trafficking minors for the convicted sex offender. Her lawyers argue she could contract COVID-19 in jail, but the judge agreed if she's not behind bars, she could flee the country. The BBC's Nader Tawfiq reports from New York.
After a life of luxury, this is now Ghislaine Maxwell's stone-cold reality. Denied bail, imprisoned in solitary confinement, and heavily guarded at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, with her trial at least a year away. Jeffrey Epstein's alleged co-conspirator appeared remotely in court from a small white room and pleaded not guilty. Stripped of her power and privilege in a brown prison top with her hair tied back, she sat mostly expressionless during the more than 2-hour hearing. Her lawyers said she was not Jeffrey Epstein and had been unfairly portrayed as a monster by endless media spin. But prosecutors successfully argued that she was an extreme flight risk and was skilled at living and hiding. They say she bought her property in New Hampshire under the alias Janet Marshall to conceal her identity. When FBI agents raided the estate, she ignored orders and locked herself in another room. Annie Farmer, one of Maxwell's accusers in the indictment, phoned into the remote hearing and implored the judge to hold her detained. She said Maxwell was a sexual predator who groomed and abused her and never showed remorse for her heinous crimes.
I don't think this is something that's going to be over with this year.
David Boyes represents 12 Epstein accusers, including Annie Farmer. He says he's handed over evidence to prosecutors which could implicate others if introduced during the trial.
Prince Andrew is clearly somebody who is going to come under even more scrutiny now than he did before. There's too much evidence of their connection, both independent of Epstein and with Epstein.
Prince Andrew has denied having sex with underage girls or being aware of Epstein's crimes. This saga has been filled with twists, turns, and disturbing revelations. Ghislaine Maxwell's impending trial has the potential to be even more explosive.
The BBC's Nader Tawfiq with that report. The Queenstown Lakes District Council is plotting for a busy summer of camping despite no new international visitors on the horizon. But some locals feel freedom camping has had its day. Our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown has more.
The number of visitors to the Queenstown Lakes District has plummeted. The economic lifeblood they pumped through the area is barely registering a pulse these days. But the council's Community Services General Manager, Thunis Clerta, says there are plans to roll out the welcome mat to those who arrive this summer.
We must be prepared for the holiday period in December, the summer period, because we are seeing more camper vans coming to our district than what we thought would happen. We are busy putting together a program of what we think we need, and we will also be discussing this with our commercial campground owners to see how we can get them involved.
The endless stream of visitors wasn't all rosy though. Freedom campers taking up and in some cases spoiling the incredible landscapes that drew people to the area had locals seeing red only a few years ago. But Mr. Clerta says the council has learned from that experience and doesn't want to repeat it.
We are really working towards that the campgrounds or other commercial options will start to emerge and take that burden off us. And we've been having discussions with 2 private entities that are really interested.
But some, such as Lake Huawei Holiday Park owner Richard Burden, says the COVID-19 pandemic should be used to draw a line under the days of freedom camping.
We've got freedom campers moving back into our district. One of the things we've learned from COVID is that we don't need them. We've got strong tourism numbers and we don't need freedom campers, full stop, ruining our environment. And we need to take a different approach, and this is a really good opportunity.
He's not alone in his concern. Kinloch Lodge owner Tony Glover says she's seen a return of some problematic behaviour since lockdown ended.
There is a lot of people camping on the Glenorchy Road, partially also down the waterfront in Glenorchy and in Glacier Burn, down by the Dart Bridge, and in areas that are really just car parks. You've got a small minority of people that do spoil it for others, but we have certainly seen fecal waste and a degree of rubbish.
Tony Glover says she wants the Department of Conservation to step in and offer free access to campsites to those stranded in the country so they use appropriate facilities.
there is certainly a great deal of distress amongst these people who don't have somewhere else to go. They can't afford to rent a property. They don't have a job. And there's a lot of people who are travelling around because they can at the moment. But again, they're travelling on a very tight budget.
But Queenstown Lakes Mayor Jim Bolt says he hasn't heard any complaints nor seen any issues since the pandemic struck.
I've had no complaints whatsoever. The last complaint I would have been last Christmas, New Year. So if there are people misbehaving, then that is a surprise to me.
He says the back of cars and roadsides are not the place for people reeling in the post-COVID economy.
What I am seeing is Kiwis in rental camper vans, and generally they seem to be behaving appropriately. We have been aware of some migrant workers who ended up sleeping in the backs of their cars for a short period of time. We addressed that and we've made sure that those people have a place to go. I will not see anybody in our district without a roof over their head or without a feed in their stomach.
Mr Bolt says visitors in camper vans are a much needed boost for Queenstown Lakes economy. And if the Trans-Tasman border opens up, he hopes Australians will get in on the act as well. For Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
Right, some time for feedback. Now, a lot of you have got in touch about this app that we're being reminded to sign up to, the New Zealand COVID tracker app. And some people have criticised it, including Judith Collins. She reckoned it was a bit hard to use. Anyway, Dennis says, I have the Q code app in my shoe repair shop and have done for 2 months. I've had a maximum of 10 of about 800 customers scan it. Time to use RFI cards as per the Nelson Hospital trial, and those are those electronic style cards. Other people say they agree with Judith. The app is poor, among other shortcomings. It won't let my wife and I both register because, like many couples, we share an email address. Another person says, I'm embarrassed to say I've largely forgotten about the app. I have no problem with the app itself, just complacent. Now, Sandy's got in touch to say, don't mock copper landlines. They work in power cuts. I apologise and withdraw until tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Andrew Little says the government won't rule out using technology from Huawei, despite a UK ban on equipment from the Chinese company for its 5G networks. National's Michael Woodhouse says he's disappointed to be stripped of the health portfolio by the party's new leader Judith Collins for his involvement in the leak of COVID-19 patients' details. The Navy is preparing to use remote-controlled underwater vehicles to search for missing Dunedin man Martin Sutty on Lake Wakatipu. And an 8-year-old Hamilton girl reported missing earlier today has been found. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7.
Tonight on Nights, Miriam Mililati, co-director of AUT's Centre for Journalism, Media and Democracy, joins us to talk about her recent 5-month journey home to New Zealand. On at the movies, Simon Morris is missing the blockbusters but manages to console himself. And we head to South Africa to talk to Mark Gevesser about his